So this application now is going with us, with my team who is using it right now. It's beta testing because then it will be ready for more widely use in academic environments. So right now let me move on to my own project of mapping soft power of Hallyu. And I will start with just some basic definitions. So what is soft power? So I think soft power concept is very popular around the world, right? And due to Professor Joseph Nye from the United States, who first introduced it. It's an intangible attraction that would save us to go along with other purposes without any exclusive threat of exchange. It basically refers to culture, institutions, and different activities, not necessarily on the government side, that make a country in which is very appealing to people living in different parts of the world. So it's basically not coercive or not military power. Another way of power in our global economy that actually makes people to see the country in a very favorable way. So Hallyu soft power is actually a subject of academic scholarship, and I've seen a lot of books on Hallyu soft power that already exist that explore the implications of Hallyu phenomenon, the global consumption of music, film, animation, games, fashion, cosmetics, cuisine, and even lifestyles, all around the world as a particular soft power that actually help the Korean government to attract tourists. We've seen the increase of foreign students and people studying Korean language and Korean culture all around the world. So it has a lot of diplomatic implications as well. So while there is a lot of scholarship written about how soft power, what actually attracted my attention was somebody who is doing critical data studies and who is very much fascinated with big data and how it influences culture. So I was attracted to the project with one simple thing, is that observation that while there is a lot of data exists on Hallyu and it's accumulated from different reports and databases and Excel spreadsheets and data of different agencies, including the government agencies and non-government agencies, there was not a single attempt yet to bring all this data together into one project, into a more comprehensive way to look at Hallyu through a data-driven perspective. That was my particular interest because I come to this with a very open and fresh perspective because I have never been a scholar of Hallyu necessarily. So, but I have expertise in cultural diplomacy and cultural relations and soft power and digital soft power. So, in my project, I have a question. My research question is: if and how could we interpret, understand, measure, and even predict the Korean presence, soft power impact, and diplomatic implications in different geolocations around the world, depending on local challenges and local opportunities? So first of all, I look at soft power not necessarily as just one resource that makes those who see it, but as a process. Soft power is a process. It's a conversion process model introduced by Joseph Nye. And what it actually means, it all starts with the resources, cultures, values, policies. And if they are not activated on the global scale through different activities, engaging audiences, then there is no value in that. And there is no value to measure the resources of soft power. No matter how attractive the culture could be, without the activation on the global scale, there will be nothing. So this conversion goes into this outreach activities and events. So, and we are looking in this case particular outputs. And eventually, that should result in building some kind of relationship. So it's a target response conversion model. And finally, we can hope that when the subject, our targeted subject is reached and introduced and exposed to our culture and values, then this subject will change their perceptions about us and about particular outcome. So we have all these 4 stages. Very interestingly, in public diplomacy studies, nobody have actually brought all these 4 different types of evaluations of public diplomacy activities into one framework. So they all existed separately, and all the scholars would look either assessing resources, or measuring outputs, or analyzing networks, or evaluating balance of sentiment. Right? And what I propose is just to bring all them together under one roof and have this more highly integrated approach. That's why I understand Hallyu of power, and this is my approach in mapping Hallyu of power into looking at different components which will be layered on the map on different stages. So first we have, of course, to look at the rich power, and this is all about the audience scope and the purchase power potential of the audiences, the digital access. To what extent we can actually, go there and hope we will reach any people in a particular locale, geographical locale. Then we also have to look. So just reaching somebody is not enough. We have to offer them something that would appeal to them, that would target them. In this case, we are talking about the appeal power. And I differentiate across national, universal, and transnational appeal, and I will talk a little bit more later about that. Then, once we are doing that and we are appealing, of course, we will have different activities that would engage our audiences. And in this case, we can have a lot of data that would help us to understand the audience engagement in terms of the digital audiences, physical audiences, experts, media coverage, and things like that. Moving to the global networks, we are moving to the final stages of soft power conversion, and we are talking already about alliances, partnerships, communities that exist due to Hallyu impact. And finally, we can this is the most difficult stage so far. We can look at what's actually going on with these communities. Why people like or do not like Hallyu? How do they perceive and what it means to them? So, and in this case, more qualitative data approach and mapping here is not very helpful. It's helpful with the sentiment analysis or Hallyu or anti-Hallyu index, which can be definitely put on the map in terms of the data. But here we need a really qualitative approach and case studies. That's why we're collaborating with the Frederick Neumann Foundation, where we actually look what's going on in these digital online communities and try to translate the sentiment of the public. So I also look at soft power as a geographical variable. It's not only a process, it's also a variable in terms of geography, because whenever we will go, the extent of how much influence you can guard in this area would be different. And I argue that the previous approaches of power measuring, where it's understood as omnipresent force, is really nonsense. It doesn't make any sense, because understandings of power, we need to understand the political context, we need to understand the global connectivity, we need to understand cultural, religious, linguistic affinities that exist in this local context. We need to understand digital mobility, integration, social economic. All these secondary variables actually play a role in finally how, for example, how each cultural phenomenon is perceived. That's why in our mapping approach, we use indices for each of the country. Each of the country receives an index of power index on different layers of mapping, and this index is a weighted average of several key normalized indicators. It's based on the scale from 0 the minimum to 100 the maximum, and we use color coding and color depth mapping with brighter colors indicated countries with higher scores. So each country receives a power score, and this score indicates to what extent people like or dislike the Hallyu in terms of all these different mapping stages that we have. So I also understand soft power as a temporal variable, right? So something that changes over time. That's why we need to understand Hallyu. So the more comprehensive approach is to look at how it develops and what's going on. So for example, here I try to map in a very draft and very symbolic way from Hallyu anti-Hallyu movement in China, right, that emerged around 2015 to 2016, and we all know that the political contacts and the political relationship between China and South Korea caused this anti-Hallyu sentiment in the society, and then that exists until right now, and that really reduced the scope, especially in terms of all the experts that started to gain some limitations in the Chinese context. So what it actually gives us, putting data on the timeline gives us an opportunity to identify patterns of Hallyu spread intensity and influence through time. And eventually, these patterns could be used to predict the future. Of course, there is a very strong human component. You can never predict that. But the basic predictions using cultural analytics is possible. And this is one of the also important feature of the project that is trying to understand what will happen next. And if we accumulated enough data from the beginning of 1990s until right now, it's 3 decades of different data, right? Could we use it to predict the future and to what happens next? This is one of the most exciting moments of the project that we use machine learning algorithms to do that. And now let me go through a few mapping layers that we have developed. So I have developed for exploring Hallyu as a soft power. So this is a QR code which leads you to a link. It's not for a mobile application, it's a desktop application, but you can save the link and play with the application with this visualization at home and in public access. So let me just start with the Hallyu rich power, which is visualized on the global map with a green color. And it actually looks at different various data that become one of the components of Hallyu power. So what I'm looking at audience scope in terms of the population and literacy rate, and of course the median age. We know, for example, that Hallyu attracts, so there is a particular age where the Hallyu is more powerful in age group, which is around 25 years old. We know, for example, that there is a lot of aging populations in the world that would make, this Hallyu products and Hallyu not so people living in the country where the more older population. So that's why it's very important to look at potential reach. Who is people living there? Of course, also the economic situation of the country is also very important because it influences the purchasing power of these people. To what extent they can be engaged by purchasing. I just talked to my students with me from Lausanne University of the Arts Singapore. Some of them are very active Hallyu fans in Singapore who just told me BTS. So they went to BTS concert in Singapore and it costs a lot of money. So actually, Hallyu consumption does require a certain level of economic stability. So I'm looking at these factors as well. And I'm also looking at digital consumptions in terms of connection of people of this country in terms of the internet penetration rate, mobile usage, and also to all these different factors. What is interesting in our case, for example, we look at 2 channels, Facebook in the Western world and WeChat use in China, because we know that China uses a powerful businesses. So we have Facebook, WeChat, because WeChat is their counter platform that access to China, that replicate Facebook. In terms of the YouTube, so in the Western world there will be YouTube, and in China it will be Bilibili. So that's why we try to map all that. So putting everything on this map, and I will show the demo a little bit later. Let me just go through some important information here. So just putting here, you've seen here that China, India are very much highlighted here. So they present this very high score on their rich power due to younger population population will be there due to increasing literacy, due to very high digital consumption in both countries. But also, if you go to Europe, you will see Norway, Ireland as potential high-risk audiences due to their very high chess power potential of the audience. So these are very interesting things. So, but of course, just reaching somebody is not enough. It doesn't guarantee any success. We need to bring something to the audience that would appeal to them and would be close to their heart. So I'm looking at these different components of this power appeal, and I'm looking at national, universal, and transnational appeal powers that exist. So this is my mapping of the national appeal power. We can see a lot of countries, not only in Europe, or not only in Asia, but also in Europe, are highlighted in yellow, and I will go over this. But let me explain what is national appeal. So national appeal actually it's putting all the data on their cultural proximity instead of cultural dimension framework. So I'm using this framework and I'm using indices that are put to each of the countries to what extent they, for example, are individualistic or collectivistic cultures, or to what extent they are on the power dimension, high power or lower power distant dimension. So I'm putting this on, and and I think in some of the papers that will be presented, you talk a lot already about this cultural proximity of Hallyu that actually eventually was very fundamental force to attract a lot of countries from Asia due to the cultural proximity that already existed there in terms of cultural values like family values, social harmony, respect for authority, and things like that. But also you talked about how it doesn't actually explain why would Hallyu, with such a strong cultural proximity to Asia, would appeal to other countries around the world. So what I try to do in this national appeal power, I combine different combination of different factors. And I looked at, first of all, of course, at the cultural proximity index, trying to understand to what extent, measuring in data, to what extent the culture of this country is similar or different. So I also look at language proximities in terms of the Korean language distribution around the world, or language group proximity, or even sign language type. I also look at social proximities in terms of religious proximities, work culture proximities, leisure culture, happiness index, divorce rates, family culture, all these things. Also looking to what extent it is similar or different, measuring in numbers. And finally, Korean exposure index, to what extent people living in this particular country are already exposed to Korean culture. Because the more they are exposed and the more it's a daily part of their daily reality, the more information they can eventually get on Hallyu and get attracted to this. So I'm looking at Korean diaspora, how big or large is in a particular country, inbound foreign students in Korea, status of Korean studies, and things like that. And what is interesting, so putting on this on the map, and I highlighted here on my presentation here, is Mongolia so far receives the highest score on national appeal power, right? So due to its very high Korean exposure, because we see a very huge Korean diaspora community, and we see a lot of students, the largest number of foreign students studying in Korea, they come from Mongolia. This is so interesting, right? So they're also very similar in terms of cultural proximity. And another country, for example, Kazakhstan, also scoring okay. But if, beyond just Asia, if we go to Latin America, if we go to Romania, we can also see that, if we go to Europe, we can also see such countries, Romania. Romania would score very high on the national appeal due to one of the highest cultural proximity and social proximity. So in terms of, even though the culture is very different, but how people, for example, in power distance, individualism, motivation, leisure culture, they are very similar to what's going on in Korea. So that would explain a little bit why this culture would appeal to countries that are not necessarily Asian countries. So we also can talk about this universal appeal power, and very interesting results are in Europe, of course. So with this universal appeal power, so it's more about how their Korean wave becomes this ambassador of liberal universal values. And we've seen a lot of groups, for example, like BDS, who become a part of United Nations, promoting, universal liberal values like end of violence, the LGBT rights, and different campaigns for social causes. So this K-culture champions universal values, equality, hard work, self-expression, all these things that would definitely appeal to countries that already are a part of this global discourse. So to measure this universal appeal power, I look at two different types of factors, like global exposure index, is to what extent the country is already very much global in terms of migration rates, English proficiency, linguistic diversity, immigrant bringing languages and things like that, and also the liberal universalism. So we are putting all these different scores of World Press Freedom Index, liberal democracy index on the map. And it gives us a lot of interesting results as well, where we see, of course, what is interesting, the United States is not the top, doesn't have the top score for universal appeal. France has the top score. And we know how many French fan communities, right? So France has the top score for universal appeal. We also see such countries as Brazil, Indonesia, also attracted to that. And finally, the transnational view. I'm moving faster because the time is limited. So in terms of the transnational appeal, I'm actually looking at all the strategic efforts made by the Korean wave industries to integrate Hallyu into different contexts around the world and to make it more appealing to global audiences. And one of the ways they're doing it is inviting these K-pop star idols from around the world, and this is kind of making it a transnational level. So in this case, we are looking at human resources diversity, at content adaptation like linguistic diversity, translations in other languages, cultural references, places of production. So we are looking what exact references are engaged in this particular country, because eventually that would make it more appealing and more interesting for audiences. And so far, this layer is the least developed because we mapped only one type of data, K-pop idols, and as you can see on the screen, the majority of K-pop idols comes from Japan, 16 in total. So, and finally, we move from this resources stage into the outputs, into audience engagement, where we mapped some of the data, like experts, Google Trends data, digital fandom, so all these different things, to see so far that the United States is actually leading in terms of their audience engagement, with France and China also having quite high scores. Okay, so I would end here, and just to give you a very, very So just how the application looks like, I will show you a few links. Yeah, okay, this is the application, and this on the left side, you will see different layers that you have elect and you will visualize. And if you click each particular country, you will be able to see the score and to explore more what each score is about and why it is so high, so low. So this is the reach file, like I said, it's all about our potential targeted reach. also engaged in Asia and even the United States is not so so I like it. And the transnational appeal, like I said, all the countries where we mapped so far only K-pop idols. So we can see there's a lot of them coming from Asian region, Australia, but also some from Latin America, which is interesting. And finally, audience engagement, where a lot of countries highlighted in the Asia and United States is the leader so far, high 100 as well. Okay, right now I would like to stop here and I would like to invite to the floor Yoga Ko, who will present